Welcome back to Blue Collar Coder. I'm Jack Harrington, and today we're going to take another look at GraphQL by looking at not one, two, or three, but four different client-side technologies to go and connect for your application to your GraphQL server. So first off, we'll use just fetch off the client to show that you can still use that same HTTP REST JSON style transfer protocol, but use GraphQL as the query language. From there, we'll look at graphql-request, which is a library to help you with that. And then going on from there, we'll look at Apollo client and finally relay. So by the end of this, you'll have four different technologies that you know about and have experience with that you can choose for your application. So let's start off by jumping into the server and get that implemented. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at the GraphQL server that we're going to set up first. It's got one query on it, and that's Pokemon, and it returns a name and a type. And it's also got a mutation. So we're going to try both things. We're going to try a query, which just gets you data, and a mutation, which changes data. So this one is called add Pokemon. And it takes a name, which is a string, and a type, which is also a string. And it returns an ID. And that ID is fake. It just returns a concatenation of those two values. We're just trying this stuff out. This isn't really about GraphQL. It's more about the GraphQL clients that we're going to try out. So on top of that, we're going to create this React app using create React app. And this is the relay version of it, which is the last one that we'll build. And up at the top, you've got the results of the query. And down at the bottom, you've got the mutation with a button. And when you press the button, it runs that mutation, gets the ID back, and puts it up in that section above that says null. Pretty easy. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is to create that GraphQL server. So to do that, we're going to use GraphQL Yoga because it's a really easy way to make a GraphQL server. So let's go create a new directory called gql-clients. GQL is short for GraphQL. And within that, we'll create a server directory. And bring up VS Code. And I'm just going to do yarn add GraphQL Yoga. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to create a package JSON right there for me. I don't really have to go and initialize one. That's fine. Okay. See, as you can see, it's got GraphQL Yoga in there. And I'm going to create a server.js file and just basically copy and paste in their example code. Next, I'll uncomment this import of the GraphQL server from GraphQL Yoga. Now we want to change out our type defs. So we want to create a new type called Pokemon. And say there's a name, which is a required string. That bang at the end of string means required. And then type is also a required string. And now Pokemon is just going to return a Pokemon. It could return an array of Pokemon. It could have an by ID, all that kind of stuff. I didn't really want to get into that, but it can totally support that. All right. And next we need a mutation. So we'll create a new type called mutation. And add Pokemon. And it also has a name, which is a type of string and required, and also type, which is also a required string, and it returns a required ID. Okay, that is our amazing schema. So let's go into resolvers and go build this. So Pokemon will just be a function that returns just a static return. Call that Bulbasaur of type fire. I actually don't know if Bulbasaur is a fire type. Tell me, that's fine. And also our mutation, which first takes a context, which we're just going to ignore. And then the arguments, the name of the type. And we're just going to return a string template of the name and the type together. And our last refinement on this is just to put HTTP in front of that localhost. That way, when I option click it in VS Code, it can pop up. All right, let's fire this thing up by just doing node server.js. And then I'm going to click on that localhost. And that brings up graphql, which is built in already. Now I've already got everything set up for localhost 4000 because I did this already. But let's just try out that mutation first. That works fine. And then try out our query. And that works fine. So that's it. That is our entire GraphQL server setup for this video. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Okay, so let's get rid of GraphQL Yoga. Keep the playground around. We'll be using that a little bit. And now we're going to go create our first app. So let's go over back into VS Code, create a new terminal window, and then go do npx create React app on a new project we'll call CRA fetch. So this is just going to be a version of the app which just uses fetch right out of the browser. No libraries. We're just going to make direct calls to our GraphQL server. All right, let's bring this up. Have a look. And that's exactly what you'd expect out of the box from Create React app. Nice little spinning React. So let's get rid of all of that. Don't need any of that. And so our first job is to make a fetch. So we need some place to put that. So let's go and use state to create a data piece of state and a data set, which is going to then set that. And we'll just start off with null. And we'll put an h1 in there and put in our stringified data. And now we're going to use a useEffect to make that first fetch. But what's going to be in that fetch? Well, I don't really want to type it out by hand. Here's a trick. We're going to go back into the browser. We're going to go replay this fetch and then look at it in the inspector. And we can see that's the right one. It's the third one in the list. The reason that there's multiples is because that GraphQL interface is going back and kind of polling the server over time. So now I'm going to right click on that and go to copy. And then within copy, I'm going to select copy as fetch. And I'll paste that in there. And that literally created the fetch JavaScript for that exact call, which is pretty cool. Just paste it in there. And now I'll save it and let Prettier do its work. And wow, that was cool. All right. So let's just try and run this. Let's go and add a then to convert the response to JSON, and then another then to basically set that data set. All right, looks great right out of the box. That is incredibly simple. Okay, but it is kind of up and in the corner there, so let me add a little bit of styling to the page. Kind of move in the center, make it not so wide. All right, that looks pretty decent. You can kind of see that on your YouTube screen. Now it's also kind of nested in there, so I'm going to change that to data.data.pokemon so that it's just the data that we want. Okay. Now this is a big fetch call, right? We don't actually need all this. So let's first trim down these headers and see what we exactly need. I'm just going to go with content type and see if that works. Hit refresh on here and it works just fine. Okay, so all we really need is content type. The rest of this stuff was just kind of added by the browser. So what we really needed was just the content type. Now let's see, do we need refer policy or that mode or the credentials? Nope. Let's see, let's try that out. Refresh and it looks great. So we're down to just headers, body, and method. Makes a lot of sense. All right, so instead of having this body as a string, let's go and turn it back into an object and then use JSON stringify to turn it back into a string. But as that object, it makes it a bit more easy for us to control. So let's go and move that into an object. And then let Prettier handle that again. Okay, looking good. So it's got 3 keys: operation, name, variables, and query. Let's clean up this query a little bit. All right. And you could, make that a template and have it on multiple lines, or you can do it like this and have it on a single line. It's really up to you. Let's try that again. Oh, still working. Great. Now let's see if we can just do it with just the query, no variables and no operation name. Excellent. Okay, so this is pretty much the smallest piece of fetch that you can do to hit our GraphQL server. You've got localhost on 4000, give it the application JSON headers, give it the query as a JSON stringified payload, and we're going to use method post. Now, some GraphQL servers support GET queries. This one out of the box just supports post. Fine by me. All right, now let's try mutation. So let's create a new h1 for mutation. And create some new data. So we're going to say that's the mutation response. That would be the ID coming back. And then also a setter for that. And now let's go and just stringify that in there. It's going to start off with null. And let's create that button. We'll call it Add Pokemon. And then we'll give it a click handler for Add Pokemon. And we're just going to copy and paste that fetch in there. But we don't want to use that same query. We want to use our mutation. So let's go back over to the playground, grab our mutation code, and make it a string template and just pop it in there. All right, let's fire it up. Okay. So here's what happened. I'm actually still setting the original data set. I'm not setting the mutation stuff, so let's fix that. And also, let's just go with data to see what's actually coming back. And we'll hit the button again. All right, looking pretty good. But it's got that data and add Pokemon. So let's just dereference it there a little bit. Add Pokemon. Do it again, and we get back YOLOsaur and YoFire. They should make one of those. A YOLO sword. I don't know what that would look like. But that really isn't realistic. Obviously, you're not going to hard code name and type like that. So let's go and just make some variables. So we define that by saying that we have a dollar name, which is of type string, and a dollar type, also of type string. And we map that in the mutation by saying name is from dollar name and type is from dollar type. But where do we define those? Well, we'll bring back the variables that we got rid of because we didn't need them before. And bring in Jack, and I guess I'm an earth type, I guess. Sure, why not? Oh, hey, okay, why not? Jackosaur. Let's do that. All right, great. So this works. So this is pretty much it. This is it for a fetch implementation of both query and mutation on our GraphQL server. Okay, so we've got the server running, we've got fetch on the client, and I think that's great for like a proof of concept or a vanilla JS setting. So let's see if we can do a little bit better by looking at the GraphQL-request library. So next up, GraphQL-request. Let's go make ourselves a Create React app with GraphQL-request as the part of the name. And then we'll start it up. Looking good. So what does GraphQL-request look like? Well, it's pretty easy. You import it, you get a request back, you create a query, just like we did before, and then you use request. You give it the GraphQL endpoint that you want to hit, you give it your query, and then you get back the data. So it's basically doing fetch for us. It's just hiding a lot of the details. All right, now to make it easy on ourselves, we're just going to go copy in the app.js that we had before for fetch and bring it in GraphQL request, that project, paste that in there. And now let's go and add GraphQL request to that project. And then import it. And then change out our fetches to request. So we'll just change out fetch for request, and then we'll kind of hack on this a little bit. We'll take the initial URL, that's fine, and just leave the query part of it. We also don't need to convert to JSON. It does it for us. And we'll just set that to data. See what that comes back as. All right, let's try this again. All right, looking pretty good. It does have Pokemon in there, since that was the name of the query method that we used. All right, let's go and do the same thing for our mutation. Change that to request, then just have the string in there. And now the third argument is optional, but it's the variables. Kind of like what you'd expect, actually. So let's put in our variables in there. And again, we don't have to do the JSON conversion, that handles that for us. And we can also scale back our data. Okay, let's take a look. All right, looks great. But again, it's got that add Pokemon and Pokemon on it. So let's go and just change out those keys. And it looks really good. Okay, so pretty simple upgrade from our fetch into GraphQL-request. Okay, so GraphQL-request is really cool, and I think it's great that it's compatible with something like a Redux or a MobX, an existing state management solution. So what if you want to do actually something else? Let's say you want to maybe use the client itself as your state manager. Let's try that using Apollo Client. So we're finished up with GraphQL-request. Let's get rid of that. And now we're going to work on Apollo Client. So again, we'll create a new Create React app. We'll call this one CRA Apollo Client. Okay, looks like our Create React app is up and running fine. So this time we're just going to grab out the data. And the format. Let's see how that goes. Oh, I forgot to make an add Pokemon. Let's go fix that. All right, so that's basically an empty husk waiting for data or something to go get data. So let's try out the Apollo client. How do we get started? Well, we have to install Apollo client and GraphQL. Let's go do that. And now we're going to bring in Apollo client and in-memory cache. So Apollo has the notion of a client, and everything, all of our requests will run through that client. We have to create the client and give it our URL for our GraphQL server. So in this case, it's the same 4,000 as before. Start that up. All right, looking pretty good. It's not blowing up on us, which is always a good sign. So the next thing to do is to provide that down the line. So we're going to use Apollo provider here. Bring that in. Gotta say the Apollo docs are really very, very solid. So what we're going to do is just change the default export from just app to a function that returns app, but also returns it wrapped in an Apollo provider that points to that client. Okay, so now that we've got that going, let's go down and see how we want to make a query off this thing. So we're going to use a hook called useQuery and a helper function called gql, which is going to allow us to template format our GraphQL strings. So we'll replace our first React use state with useQuery, and then use gql and give it our query. And then it returns an object, and within that object is a bunch of stuff, but most importantly, data. It's got an error flag and other things, but the one we want is data. And then we'll use that GQL template function and wrap our query. All right. And that's it. Wow. Okay. That's really cool. So because we were already looking at data, that translated really nicely into our current layout. So there we go. We got data Pokemon. And now when we stringify it, we can just say, well, if you have an object data, then use it. Otherwise, here's an empty object. And then on that, use Pokemon. And there we go. It is giving us this additional type name information. You can ignore that if you want. That's fine. So how do you do a mutation then? Well, let's go down into fetching and then into mutations. And within that, we can see that we have another hook called useMutation. And it returns an array. So in this case, it's returning addToDo, which is the function that you're going to call to actually invoke the mutation. And then just like with our query, it returns another object, which has all the error and all that, as well as data. So let's just paste that into our code. And we're going to remap that data key to mutation response. Now we can get rid of the React use state. And then go and include use mutation. And let's go back over here to get our mutation. And wrap that in GQL. But that's not an add to do, is it? It's an add Pokemon mutation? Sure. Okay. So let's invoke that. And we can give it some variables. Name is Jacksonian Soar, and I'm a fire type this time. All right, go run that. Oh, I see what happened. Okay, so the original mutation still has those hard-coded values in it. Let's just go create those as parameters. Just like we did before with $name, $type. Hey, that looks great. ID is Jacksonian Fire. Awesome. All right, so Apollo client is really cool. The ability to provide that client down the line is great. You can also use it in a Redux or a MobX setting if you want to as well. Let's try out Facebook's Relay and see how that compares. Okay, so the last one I'm going to play with is Relay. So let's go create ourselves a Create React app on CRA Relay. And let's go into the installation and setup section and just start doing a lot of yarn ads here. So let's do our first yarn ad of React Relay. And let's go change out our template. Add that data. And this is just to get that UI running. So we'll create a little placeholder, add Pokemon in there. Start that up. And great. Okay. Got a nice starting point there. So let's go back to our docs and see what's next. The next thing to do is add relay config. So let's go and add that in development mode. And then create our relay configuration file, relay config.js. I'm going to use pb paste for that. On OS X, Mac OS X, you can use pb paste, and that just takes the paste buffer and exports it on standard IO. So I'm going to redirect that into that relay config.js file. On any other system, you just create a new file and paste that in there. All right, I'm going to call the schema, instead of /data/schema, make that schema.graphql, just in that current directory. And what is a schema.graphql? Well, it's just the schema. So let's go copy that from our server. Cool. And what that's going to allow Relay to do is actually validate our queries at build time, which is really neat. All right, next thing we need to do is bring in the Babel plugin for Relay. Now we're going to do something a little different. Because Create React App doesn't allow you to hack on its Babel, we're actually going to use the macro version of this. Normally you'd use it as a plugin in Babel, just like it's documented here, but we're going to use this variant where it's const GraphQL equals require Babel plugin relay /macro. And that works and is compatible with Create React App. And the last thing we need to add is the relay compiler. And that's going to compile the GraphQL, which is in our JS files and our JSX files into, well, it's got some intermediary files that it needs to run. So it's going to go and create those for us. It's a very picky compiler, as we'll soon see. Okay, now we'll go grab this script and add it into our package.json, and that's going to run that relay compiler for us on the source with the right schema. And we'll run relay, and because we don't actually have any relay code, it runs just fine, but it's nice to see it actually work. So we're actually going to do the UI a little differently here to kind of show off a lot of the value of Relay as opposed to these other systems. And one of those big values is that you can roll up requests together and run them as one request to the server, even though the requests are from different components. So we're going to create a fragment container for the name of the Pokemon, and then have another fragment container for the type of Pokemon. And then we're going to use a wrapper component that would then fuse those together and make one single request to the server to get all that done. So let's start off with creating our name component. And we're just going to paste in their example code. And we'll rename this Pokemon name. And it'll take a Pokemon. And it's just going to basically have a div with Pokemon name in there. And we'll change the fragment container definition. So we're pointing at Pokemon. Get rid of some of their docs. Call it Pokemon name. And all we want is a name. Okay, cool. And now we'll also remove the GraphQL because we're going to bring that in from that macro. If I was in anything other than create React app and I had control over Babel, I would just use that GraphQL, but I need to use this macro GraphQL instead. Okay, now in order to get this running, we need to run that compiler. So let's do yarn relay. And it gives us an error. And that error says that it wants Pokemon name as the file name as opposed to name, which it currently is. As I say, this compiler is incredibly picky. Let's try that again. Okay, so it's like we said Pokemon name, and it's expecting Pokemon name Pokemon. Okay, let's change that. Now are you happy? Relay, oh, you're finally happy, great, okay. So now we need to wrap that in something, that query renderer, so let's give that a try. So we're going to create a new file called Pokemon.jsx, probably the wrong name again. And we'll start hacking. We're going to include Pokemon name that we just created. And it's not going to take any parameters. We'll call this Pokemon. We'll then build out that query. The query is called Pokemon, and it just runs Pokemon. And then for that value, the ... value, we need to go back to the original file and grab out Pokemon name Pokemon. Cool. Now we're not going to pass any variables, and we're just going to go and render, once we have the data, Pokemon name with the supplied properties. All right, let's take a look. Okay, so the last thing is we need to have this environment for relay. We haven't created that yet. So let's go back over to the docs and check out the relay environment in the quick start guide. Let's just paste that in there, create relay environment, make some changes. So we're going to call that localhost GraphQL. And run relay. Okay, it looks like I messed up my JSX syntax, so let's go fix that under variables. Okay. Again, it doesn't like the name Pokemon. It needs Pokemon query, so let's change out both the query and also the name of the component. Okay, relay is now happy with that. Because again, it's very sticklery about that naming. And let's give this a try. Last thing to do is bring in Pokemon query into our host app. Give this a try. All right, so it has a problem with GraphQL. Now this is telling us that, again, we've brought in that wrong GraphQL. We're not using the macro, so let's go do that. Okay, now it's failed to fetch. That's interesting. Let's go take a look. Okay, I messed up on the host name. Oh, I messed up. I didn't put the port number in there. Oh, I messed up again. It's not /GraphQL, it's just /. Okay, now it's working. Awesome. So let's go take a look at that request it sent out. And you can see that it's got the query in there, but it's also got the fragments. And so that's going to tell GraphQL to kind of construct a query with fragments from different places. That's all part of the GraphQL standard. This isn't something specific to Relay. You can use that in any environment. Okay, let's create a new file called Pokemon type. Basically Pokemon name, which just changes to type. And this is just to show you that you can have different components that have different data requirements, and then the query renderer will put that all together for you into a single request. Really nice. Now let's bring it back over into the query renderer, add in Pokemon type. And now since the server's still running, it's giving us an error that it can't find that generated file. So let's go back in and do yarn relay again. Got in one that time. Okay. And it's still giving us just Bulbasaur, but that's because I haven't changed out the template. So let's go make some changes there. Create a div. And then use Pokemon type in there. Hey, that's looking great. Okay. And it's still just a single request to the server. Go over and have a look at that inspector panel, right? There's only one request going to the server, which is really cool. And what's interesting is if you took out one of those and then you took out the fragment, right? The other one would be just fine, which is awesome. And so the last thing to try out with Relay is a mutation. So let's go over to the mutations documentation on the API reference. Go and grab out some example code. We're going to create a new file called add Pokemon mutation.js. Paste that in there, and it'll make some changes. First, let's not fall into the same trap with GraphQL again. So let's paste in that GraphQL macro. Now let's change out the GraphQL for our Pokemon mutation. Okay, looking pretty good. And we'll change the function name to add Pokemon mutation, add in some additional arguments that'll map to variables. Okay, looking good. So let's relay that. And it's having some issues. All right, maybe it's that I haven't exported this. Let's try it again. Nope, same issue. Oh, I think I know what this is. Okay, so the name of the mutation is wrong. It just needs to be lowercase add Pokemon mutation. Okay, fine, be that way. All right, let's bring in the add Pokemon mutation function and then call it in add Pokemon. We'll just say that we got our environment already and that I'm now a wind Pokemon. It's, I guess, appropriate. Bring in that environment. And last thing, let's go and set the mutation response to whatever comes out of that function. And we'll run our yarn relay and start it up. Oh, I didn't make that an async function, so let's make that an async function so we can use await. And now we'll add Pokemon. Now the mutation is going, but we're not getting any value back. Okay. I think I know what happened. Okay, so if we look back at the mutation code, we're not actually doing anything here. All we're doing is putting out a console log saying, response received from the server. Great. Okay, well, what's in the response? Okay, so let's go and create a new promise. We want that anyway because we're awaiting it. And plop that in there. And then we're just going to resolve with that response. Okay, looking good. Great. So there you have it. Relay on our GraphQL server. All right, so Relay is really cool. It gives you a lot of confidence when you go into production that it's going to work because of that compiling where you actually hit the schema to make sure that everything's cool before you get there. All right, well, if you have any questions or comments, just be sure to put those in the comment section down below. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you really like the video, hit the subscribe button. Click on that bell and you'll be notified the next time one of these videos shows up. And in the meantime, be happy, be healthy, and be safe.